January 1945. The night sky over the Japanese home islands was a vast canvas of black, pierced only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Inside a B-29 Superfortress, soaring silently at 30,000 feet, the crew huddled in their pressurized cabin, ears straining against the subtle hum of engines that carried them over enemy territory. Frost traced the edges of the small windows, casting ghostly patterns across tense faces. A sudden blip on the radar screen, small, almost imperceptible, pulled the navigator from his map. "Contact, 12 o'clock high," he murmured, eyes scanning the instruments with the practiced calm of someone who knew panic could be lethal. Below, Japan slept, unaware of the unseen threat slicing through their night sky. In the tail, the gunner's hands tightened around the cold steel of his .50 caliber machine guns. Each second stretched into an eternity. Somewhere in the darkness, Japanese fighters lurked, silent shadows poised to strike. One split-second decision, one careful squeeze of the trigger, could mean life or death for the entire crew. The bomber drifted closer to fate, carrying men, machines, and explosives into a night that would test courage and precision in ways they had never imagined. The night was waiting, and so was the enemy. By early 1945, the war in the Pacific had reached a turning point. American forces had recaptured key islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, establishing forward bases within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. From these positions, the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, could finally project long-range air power that had previously been impossible. The B-29 Superfortress, a technological marvel, became the spearhead of this campaign. Pressurized cabins allowed crews to operate at altitudes beyond the reach of most Japanese fighters. Remote-controlled defensive turrets, radar-assisted navigation, and immense bomb loads turned each mission into a calculated assault on both industry and morale. Japanese defenses, by contrast, were increasingly strained. Radar networks were incomplete, fighter units undertrained, and fuel shortages limited operational flexibility. Night interceptions were particularly challenging, and other war materiel vital to the Japanese war effort. The target's strategic value made the raid a priority, and the B-29 assigned to this sortie carried a full bomb load, enough to level multiple city blocks. Each crew member understood the stakes. Success would weaken Japan's industrial backbone, but failure could mean death. The crew itself was a mix of seasoned veterans and younger airmen still learning the unforgiving realities of high-altitude warfare. The pilot had flown dozens of missions over the Pacific, while the navigator had charted routes that spanned thousands of miles of open ocean. The bombardier's hands were steady, trained to release tons of explosives with precision. And in the tail, the gunner, still relatively new but quick-thinking, watched the dark horizon, every muscle taut with anticipation. Japanese home defenses were alert, though often reactive. Searchlights carved the sky in rotating beams, attempting to illuminate incoming bombers. Radar stations relayed contacts, but their coverage was patchy and sometimes delayed. Every decision, from the pilot adjusting altitude to the gunner tracking a fleeting silhouette, was a balance between precision and instinct. As the bomber approached Japanese airspace, tension rippled through the crew. The night was quiet, too quiet, punctuated only by the hum of engines and the faint flicker of instruments. Somewhere in the darkness, the enemy waited, aware that each B-29 crossing the horizon was a threat not just to infrastructure, but to the psychological fortitude of their cities. It was in this suspended moment, between departure and engagement, that the fateful encounter would begin, testing skill, courage, and the power of a single, decisive action. Inside the B-29, tension was tangible. Every crew member knew that a single misstep could be fatal. The pilot's hands moved with quiet precision, adjusting controls against the high-altitude chill. The navigator cross-checked radar and maps, tracing a course through dark skies toward Tokyo's industrial heart. Mission planning in the USAAF was meticulous, yet leadership's decisions were tested the moment bombers crossed into enemy territory. Commanders on the ground coordinated formations, altitudes, and timing to reduce vulnerability to Japanese fighters and flak. In the air, the pilot's leadership was immediate and tangible, adjusting altitude, coordinating with fellow aircraft, and making split-second calls that could save or doom the crew. The ability to maintain calm under extreme pressure was as critical as any technological advantage. From the Japanese perspective, night raids were a formidable challenge. Pilots in Nakajima J1N1, Gecko, and modified Zero night fighters relied on scarce radar intelligence and fleeting searchlight illumination. Each approach demanded calculated climbs through frigid air, where misjudging altitude or speed could mean fatal failure. Despite determination, the technological gap was stark. Yet their skill, courage, and adaptability could occasionally exploit mistakes, keeping the threat real for every bomber traversing the night sky. The psychological weight of war pressed heavily on both sides. For the American crew, each mission carried the dual burden of strategic impact and human consequence. Civilian populations faced devastation, while gunners and airmen confronted the immediate reality of life and death for themselves and others. For Japanese pilots and commanders, defending the homeland came with immense pressure and unavoidable loss. Every decision, every trigger pulled or avoided, carried moral resonance. Courage, responsibility, and the stark awareness of mortality intertwined in every moment above Tokyo. These perspectives, leadership, enemy strategy, and moral stakes combined to heighten tension, setting the stage for the imminent turning point, the split-second shock that will determine the survival of the crew. March 9, 1945. Tokyo lay beneath a moonless sky, its streets darkened by blackout curtains. The B-29 drifted silently toward its target, engines humming a steady mechanical rhythm. Inside, the crew moved with practiced efficiency, unaware that shadows of the enemy were already converging from multiple directions. In the tail, the gunner's eyes caught a subtle movement, a faint silhouette drifting against the dark horizon. His heart accelerated, not from fear, but from recognition. This was no ordinary blip. It was a Nakajima J1N1 night fighter, climbing with deadly intent. Moments stretched, each second weighted by the knowledge that detection too late would be catastrophic. The pilot adjusted altitude slightly, formation discipline holding, while the navigator whispered corrections to keep the aircraft on course. The fighter's approach was precise, exploiting a blind spot in the bomber's defensive arc. Searchlights from below illuminated fleeting glimpses, but the B-29's massive frame remained mostly invisible until the fighter was perilously close. The gunners in other positions began tracking shadows, but the tail gunner had the clearest line of sight. He calculated trajectory, distance, and speed almost instinctively, the training and countless hours of vigilance converging into a single moment. Then came the split-second decision. The gunner aligned his .50 caliber machine guns, squeezed the trigger, and released a controlled burst. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness, striking the fighter's fuselage. Flames erupted, illuminating the bomber in brief, fiery bursts. The enemy aircraft tumbled, engines coughing, and eventually spiraled away, neutralized before it could strike. Silence returned, but only briefly. Adrenaline surged through the crew. The pilot checked instruments, confirming no damage. The navigator's hands trembled slightly as he refocused on the course. In the tail, the gunner's hands still tingled from the adrenaline surge, eyes scanning for any sign of a second attacker. Japanese night fighters were unpredictable, and the crew knew the first encounter rarely signaled the end. Ahead, searchlights traced the sky, painting streaks of white through the darkness. Another silhouette appeared smaller, faster, darting in from the starboard side. The tail gunner adjusted quickly, anticipating trajectory and compensating for the bomber's speed and drift. His fingers pressed the trigger with precision. Tracer rounds streaked through the void, striking the approaching fighter just as it attempted to position for an attack. The enemy pilot, forced into evasive maneuvers, narrowly avoided a collision but was unable to maintain the approach. Inside the cabin, the crew held collective breath. Each man was acutely aware of how thin the line between survival and catastrophe had been. The pilot maintained steady control, weaving slightly to reduce exposure without disturbing formation. The bombardier's gaze remained fixed on the target coordinates, knowing that the mission's success still depended on precise execution despite the chaos around them. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the bomber continued its path. The tail gunner's awareness never wavered. Every shadow could conceal an attacker, every cloud a potential threat. Yet the disciplined training, instincts honed through countless drills, and split-second decisions had turned the tide in this moment. By the time the B-29 reached the target zone, the immediate threat had passed. The bomber, battered only by adrenaline and tension rather than enemy fire, was intact. The crew absorbed the reality. A single gunner's rapid, decisive actions had prevented the destruction of the aircraft and preserved the lives of everyone aboard. That night, courage, precision, and technology converged in a way that would define the mission, leaving an indelible mark on both the men who flew it and the broader story of aerial warfare in the Pacific. With the danger momentarily behind them, the mission now shifted toward completing its objective, releasing the payload over Tokyo, changing the course of the night forever. As the first bombs were released over Tokyo, the city below erupted in fire and chaos. The Shitamachi districts, dense with wooden homes and narrow streets, became tinderboxes within minutes. Towers of flame and thick black smoke rose skyward, visible even from 30,000 feet. Factories, warehouses, and residential blocks alike were engulfed, their destruction immediate and indiscriminate. The human toll began to mount as families fled into the streets, firefighters struggled against overwhelming blazes, and the city's infrastructure collapsed under the sudden, relentless assault. For the B-29 crew, a mixture of relief and somber focus settled in. Their aircraft remained intact, thanks largely to the tail gunner's split-second interventions earlier in the night. The pilot adjusted course, maintaining formation with other bombers while preparing for the long flight back to Saipan. The navigator confirmed the route, ensuring they avoided flak zones and potential Japanese interceptors on the return journey. Every crew member understood that their survival was not guaranteed, yet they had completed the mission with precision, fulfilling the strategic objectives that had been meticulously planned weeks in advance. Japanese military leadership, meanwhile, faced a harsh and immediate reckoning. Reports from observers and radar stations confirmed the scale of destruction. Key industrial centers were incapacitated. transportation routes blocked, and large sections of residential areas destroyed. Commanders scrambled to mount countermeasures, but limitations in trained pilots, fuel, and anti-aircraft coverage rendered most responses ineffective. Panic and disbelief rippled through command rooms, as the reality of the B-29's technological superiority became undeniable. The psychological impact was profound. Civilians experienced terror and disorientation, while military planners recognized that the traditional air defense strategies were insufficient. The raid demonstrated the lethal combination of high-altitude bombing capability, precision targeting, and human courage, altering both immediate tactics and the broader understanding of aerial warfare over Japan. The destruction of Tokyo set a precedent, signaling that the balance of power in the skies had irrevocably shifted, and that the war on the Japanese home islands would never be the same. Japanese military command attempted reactive measures. Fighter units were redeployed, flak positions recalibrated, and remaining radar stations tasked with earlier detection. Yet the B-29's high-altitude advantage rendered many of these efforts ineffective. Interceptor aircraft, even when scrambled, struggled to reach the bombers in time, and anti-aircraft artillery remained largely impotent. The technological disparity was stark, leaving Japanese forces unable to dictate the tempo of aerial engagements. For the American crews, the raid was a sobering reminder of the human cost behind strategic objectives. Diaries and mission reports highlighted the dual nature of their work. Precision strikes achieving tactical goals, yet often leaving civilians as unintended casualties. The tail gunner, whose actions had saved the bomber during a night raid, reflected a broader truth of total war. The stakes extended beyond enemy equipment to the fragile lives intertwined with the theater of combat. Strategically, the raid reshaped the Pacific campaign. Japanese leaders realized that air superiority over their home islands had been decisively compromised. Industrial and civilian vulnerability now dictated defensive operations, forcing reactive rather than proactive strategies. The psychological impact was pervasive. Fear, uncertainty, and a sense of inevitability eroded morale among both military personnel and civilians. The March 9th attack set the precedent for subsequent raids on Osaka, Nagoya, and Kobe. Each mission reinforced the lessons learned. Advanced technology combined with tactical precision could strike at the heart of the enemy, leaving profound physical and psychological consequences. In every sense, the B-29 raids marked a turning point, demonstrating the interplay of courage, planning, and innovation in modern aerial warfare. The night of March 9th would be remembered not only for destruction, but for the decisive moments that ensured the survival of those who carried the mission to completion. The night of March 9th, 1945, remains etched in history not merely as a tactical success, but as a testament to the convergence of human courage, technological innovation, and strategic foresight. The B-29 Superfortress had demonstrated its unparalleled capabilities, high-altitude flight, long-range endurance, and devastating payload precision, changing the nature of warfare over the Japanese home islands. Yet, even the most advanced machines depended on human skill, intuition, and split-second decisions. The tail gunner's decisive action, a single perfectly timed burst of fire, exemplified this truth. One individual, acting with clarity under extreme pressure, altered the outcome of an entire mission, safeguarding the lives of dozens of crew members.